We'll stay.
It stresses me out.
Put a bodyguard in the room. You gotta go nice.
I have a bodyguard in the room?
Yeah, we're watching Big Brother.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's good.
You need anything? Okay.
I'm fine, thank you. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started since we're already running late. There's nothing better than that. First thing in the morning. 8:30 is a really early session. I mean, I get to work way earlier than 8:30, but something about having to teach class at 8:30 a.m. after a nclgisa event makes me a little sleepy. Anybody go to the gym this morning? No, didn't see any of you there. Shame on all of you for not going to the gym and working out with Cord, who has biceps. Literally, we took a picture. This is Agile project management at its finest. We took a picture and he was doing his bicep like this, and it literally was as big as my entire head. It's hilarious. I love it. So we're going to talk about Agile project management this morning. Exciting stuff for 8:30 a.m. Anybody here ever done any Agile project management classes? A few? Some? Anybody here ever done Agile programming? Not formally, but pretty much all programming on the fly is Agile programming at some point.
Some of the principles.
Yeah, some of the principles. So we're going to talk about the principles. We're going to talk through some ways that you can implement this in your own organization. This does come out of the Agile programming sphere in terms of thinking about Agile project management. So it's a way to look at project management using a couple of the principles that come from the Agile programming sphere. And really, this is the way that it's sort of rolled out, is if you're thinking about Agile project management, you start from the macro level and you work your way down. But we talked a couple of days ago in the class that I was teaching about gamification or game theory. Have you guys been looking at game theory or gamification? It's a really interesting concept. We're trying to figure out how we can engage citizens using gamification at some level. Maybe we want to engage them, I don't know, but I think it's a reasonable assumption to make. And so in this space, we're going to do a little bit of gamification, but it's not the traditional like Xbox gamification. It's a different way to game the planning environment. You're not going to see it in this particular presentation, but there's something called the cereal box concept that's really big in Agile right now. You know what cereal box is? Have you heard of that? Yeah, who in here has heard of cereal box concept? A couple of you have heard of it. It's a really cool concept. So when you're thinking about how you plan a project that you're working on for Agile, this kind of planning game, one of the things that you would do, hey Cord, there's a guy with the biceps bigger than my head. One of the things that you would do in the Agile space with the cereal box concept is imagine what a cereal box looks like. Right? What's the front of your Cheerios box look like? Like what? Product. It's a big Cheerios, or let's go with Wheaties, because that's a little bit better example. They have Wheaties across the top, and they tell you like there's vitamins and minerals in it at the corner, and then there's a picture of somebody famous endorsing Wheaties. Right? So the concept is the front of your planning process is the big idea. It's the thing that sells. It's Gabrielle, what's the little gymnast's name? Reese. It's her selling your product. So the idea is to put all the good stuff that makes people want whatever project you're going to roll out on the front, and then the back is all the ingredients where you list how much sugar is actually in these. Right? So it's actually a really fun thing to do as you're planning a project, to have your team work on the cereal box concept, and we'll talk about it a little bit more as we go along. The other thing is, this is going to sound a lot like spiral design. If you guys know sort of the programming methodologies like waterfall methodology or spiral, it's going to sound a lot like spiral because you're going to do a lot of incremental small releases, and you're going to constantly be tweaking your project or your programming, if you were doing programming, to meet your customer goals. So we're going to talk through this, and then we'll go into each of these a little bit more in detail. So the assumption that we had is that when we start off with basic project management, how many of you have ever done like a class in project management? Did they talk about where project management came from? Construction, right? And so construction is a pretty known, fixed entity. It takes X number of bricks to build a wall this high, right? It doesn't really move much. Software, IT projects, not quite as known, right? So they're really vague. Even our vendor community probably can't estimate very well if you talk to them in terms of what a project is going to take. They give you a rough ballpark. They mark it up 100%, right? Because there's a lot of variation, because they're not going to know until they get into your organization what it's going to take. So we assume in basic project management, in traditional project management, that we have a predictable, stable environment, we have rigid set of demands or needs, and we have information adequacy. How many of you have ever been in an IT project that had that experience? Right? I mean, even having a server exchange or switch out is going to create all sorts of nightmares for you. So we think about it, and we really decide, when we look at Agile, that we're going to move away from the assets, the servers, the switches, the routers, the network cable, to the people and the interaction. So I always think of Agile as the softer side of IT. It's the selling part that you spend a lot of time doing. You cultivate a lot of relationships in it. And you always start from the output side or the outcome side and work your way backwards. So that's why the cereal box has got the outcome on the front, and the back is all the ingredients. Because nobody cares about what's on the back or on the side, right? That's not what they read. They read that it's good for you and there's 35 vitamins and minerals in it. So we take these folks, and it's a great way for IT professionals to do something that probably they're not really accustomed to, which is figuring out how to deliver business value and articulate that business value to everyone in the organization. So we're assuming you're highly skilled. I know, because I work with lots of you, that you are very highly skilled. And we're going to say that Agile actually allows us to work in a way that empowers the project teams to deal with chaos. Chaos is good. How many of you like chaos? Everybody in here likes chaos, right? How many of you believe you live in chaos? Okay, good. Maybe you don't like chaos because you live in chaos, but the bottom line is we actually have to work in a chaotic environment, and it's actually a good thing. We're going to call it chaotic as we go through this, a chaotic environment, and we're going to use complexity theory to change the way that we think about what we're providing. And think about the town of Cary. Right now, they have a wonderful group of citizens that are highly engaged called the Technology Task Force. Does anybody here have a group of citizens like that? That are highly engaged in the workings of IT? We're being recorded, and this is being streamed on YouTube, just so you know. So if you're going to talk, I just want to make sure you know that. So this group of citizens is creating a chaotic environment. Because what's happening is they come up with ideas that they want the city to implement, like social media in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, 4 weeks' time, and all of a sudden every other project has to stop. Because we use traditional project management methodologies that allow us to work on certain things in certain sort of chunks of time, right? If you were using Agile, it would be a little bit different because you would be developing and you would be able to kind of plug and play. It doesn't deal with the resource issue that you're underfunded or under-resourced staff-wise, but it does allow you to adapt to the complexities a little bit easier. Okay, so just to give you a kind of an overview of complexity theory, we assume that we're all interacting in a complex environment and that we have some rules. Now, the opposite of complexity theory is government. Yes, it is chaos, absolutely. And the reason I say that is, look at the second bullet point. We're governed by simple, localized rules with constant feedback. There is nothing simple about the rulemaking process in government. Right? We have all sorts of rules that come, if you're coming to the sessions later on today, there's a class on CJIS compliance, right? Which is the Criminal Justice Information Standards. There is nothing simple about the rules that came down from the FBI. They can't even interpret the rules that they've written, right? So there's nothing simple about the rules, and they're not localized. I taught a class yesterday to the vendor community, and I said, you know, here's the problem. We have all of these rules. So we've got federal rules that govern procurement, in terms of what governments can do. Then we have state rules. And then, at the end of the day, your local government can set up a whole different set of rules to play by as long as they're more restrictive than whatever the state and the federal rules are. Right? So we've got a lot of challenges that we have going on in terms of this simple localized rules. We can still fix it within our own teams. And we don't have a lot of feedback. How many of you get feedback on a regular basis? No. Right? You only hear when the servers go down and things don't work anymore. The other thing is we assume in the complexity theory that people self-organize. How many of you have self-organized teams? Anybody done that? actually really fun. How many of you have more than 2 staff people in IT? Okay, good, because it's really hard to self-organize when it's you. Right? So, good, right? But so, I'm thinking about Cary just because I know their structure. In Cary, we actually recently made a recommendation, looking at the way that they're operating, to build project teams. And they would really be self-organized teams, where you go and say, here's a project we're going to work on, and let's get people from Robin's team, and from Terry's team, and from Mike Mull's team, and let them figure out what they want to work on, but let them work towards the same goal, because it allows for some cross-functional experiences that otherwise they aren't going to get. So that self-organizing is really important. It also assumes that we act a lot like birds when they fly. Right? So when birds fly, they fly in a V formation, for the most part, right? And they take turns being the leader. That's the other assumption that this is going to have, is that whatever your strength is, you get to be the leader during that time in the programming or project management space. So it's called a complex adaptive system. We react. We all live in this. We just don't realize that we live in this. So we react based on the environment when different stressors are put into the environment. And then we evolve with that. So we're going to talk about these various sort of principles. Number 1 is going to be the guiding vision. Number 2 are small network teams. And the fact that it's small is really important. We cannot have really large teams. Number 3 is going to be simple rules. 4 is open information. 5 is light touch. And then 6 is adaptive leadership. So, as we think about it, the bottom, this is the organization. I already told you about planning games and customer tests and small releases. And then the team is going to do sort of coding standards and a sustainable pace. That's going to be really big when we talk about this. They're going to have a metaphor. They're constantly integrating. And they have ownership. That collective ownership is huge so that you don't have, let's say, the programmers telling the server folks that it's their fault that things aren't working, right? How many of you have that experience where people within the same IT department blame each other? Never, ever, right? So that'll work on that. And then the individual has got some other things that they're doing as well. Simple design and the basics of sort of Agile programming are built into that. But Agile project management wraps all the way around this. So number 1, how do you create a guiding vision? First of all, I should tell you that there is nothing about Agile project management that says that it's only IT doing this. As a matter of fact, the assumption is that your customers are engaged, that they are team members. How many of you engage your customers and put them on the team when you roll out a project? Good, that's good. I like that. So you put them on the team, and you're going to set up clear expectations. You have to figure out what they actually are expecting and what the scope of the work is. And you do it in something called a wrap, and that's not like your traditional wrap where you get to do music and I can't do it. But it's a rapid planning session. It's called a wrap, right? Sometimes it's also a rapid programming session where you see how quickly you can build something. I was at Open Data Day. Did anybody go to Open Data Day a couple days ago? Did you go to the technical? Did anybody go to the technical session? They gave them, what, like half a day to come up with cool ideas. They call it a hackathon, to build an app, essentially, to put out for public consumption. They give them like half a day. That's an amazing amount of work to get done in 4 hours, 3 hours, whatever it was. And so the idea there is they actually did a wrap. They did a rapid planning, rapid programming session to very quickly build an application. And the application they came up with was great. Why was it great? Because they didn't have time to doubt themselves. Right? So this is the whole idea, is you don't have time to question yourself. You have a clear set of rules that you're going to operate by. They're very simple and localized. You have an outcome you're trying to get to, develop a cool application, and then you work as fast and furious as you can to get it rolled out, and you never stop to think, what if, or I can't, or what are the things that are going to limit me from doing this? So one of the ways that we create shared expectations is actually this tool, and it's a really interesting tool. The problem with this particular version of the tool, and you can find these, you can download them, is if everybody says everything is 100%, it's not going to work. So you have to set up some rules that you can never equal more than 100%, or you can't have more than 2 things that are 100% and 2 things. You've got to force them into a distribution. So here you're trying to figure out what is most important to your stakeholders. IT is a stakeholder, senior management's a stakeholder, the end user, the customer is a stakeholder. So it's more than just on time and within budget, which is the metric we love, right? We're on time and on budget. If the user doesn't use it, that's their problem. Does anybody believe that? No, because you wasted taxpayer dollars ultimately if the user doesn't use it. So you're going to talk to them. So is it important to have satisfied client groups? Well, the word client means one thing for you. If you work for agriculture, the word client means something very different because it might mean fair goers, and they want fried food, right? Fried everything. So we have to make sure that satisfied client groups, if that's the most important thing, what does that do to your project? It's run by the client, and most likely it slows it down. Do you agree with that? That you would slow down a project to ensure that you're getting what your client needs. If it is to meet objectives and requirements, and let's say that they're legislative mandates. Let's say it's CJIS compliance by September 30th of 2013. You can see that I spent all night last night talking about CJIS compliance. If that was the most important thing, then that's going to change the rules of the game. It's not going to be what's best, and actually we've been having this conversation, it's not what's best for the police officers that are out there doing the work. It's whatever meets the rules that the FBI has set so they don't yank our DCI connection. It's a very different model. Agreed upon budget, maybe that's the most important, maybe that's the least important. Delivering on time, adding value to the organization. That may be the most important. So your whole stakeholder process, everybody gets to vote on this and say where they're at. And then you look at the numbers and you have to come to some sort of shared understanding. Right? Because you know the cheap, fast, and good triangle? Does everybody know the cheap, fast, and good triangle? Anybody not know it? You can raise your hand. It's okay if you don't know it. Everybody knows it? Excellent. Okay. So in the cheap, fast, and good triangle, we've got to make sure that we know, does it need to be fast, does it need to be cheap, or does it need to be good? Because we're going to have to trade something off to do that. We have to create a shared understanding. That, in my book, is where traditional project management kind of comes in. How many of you do project charters? Right? This is really important. Because the shared understanding that you're going to do, that you're going to document, is a project charter in my world. Right? It's a short project charter, but it's still a project charter that everybody signs. I always think about this like a marriage contract. Right? If we had project charters at the start of a marriage, based on the way that you acted when you were dating, and then we could fire somebody for not meeting the SLA, right? This might actually motivate people to do the right thing. Cord's going to be like, yes, I'm going back and give Melissa a project charter. Okay. We also have to define the scope. What is in and not in the scope? Again, this is a project charter thing. If we say that within the scope of this project, we're going to ensure that there is Wi-Fi for everyone in the entire county. Anybody heard that from your vendors, your council members or commissioners lately? Wi-Fi for everyone, internet speed of, 768K up and down. I'm being facetious. But we have to decide, is that within the scope or not within the scope? Maybe it's only Wi-Fi to the disenfranchised. Maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's only Wi-Fi for public purposes. So we have to lay out what's in the scope. The stakeholders get to tell you what is going to be in and outside the scope. We had this experience not too long ago where we were starting to work on some projects. Sounds like a good idea. We go down a path, we're going to build out a new application. And all of a sudden, everybody adds what I like to call bells and whistles. Right? So now your cost is up double. The amount of time it takes to get the work done is up triple. And actually they come up with ideas that are not even technically feasible. All the time. This always happens, right? So we have to make sure that the stakeholders are laying out what's inside and outside of the project. And then anything that's not resolved, so as you're thinking about Agile project management, you're going to be working with the team, and if you say, that's not within the scope, and they say, yes, it is, they send it to the sponsor. Who's the sponsor of a project? The person paying for it usually is the sponsor of the project, right? So it's going to be somebody high up in the organization, and the unresolved items are going to go to the sponsor gets to decide. If it's outside the scope of the project, they assign it away. And this is really important about Agile, because it doesn't mean that it's not a good idea. It just means that you're not going to build it into this project. I was telling Bill Stice from Cary not too long ago, I was in his office and said, the thing that I see happening, and maybe I'm wrong, but this is my interpretation of what's happening in Cary. You're working fast and furious. I mean, I listed off for the task force at the town how many projects had been accomplished in the last 2 years alone. I mean, massive, massive projects. You know, radio revamping, voicemail rollover, change out, email systems, a brand new public safety software system. And there are all these huge projects that they had done while still maintaining everything else that has to be maintained. And what happened, in my opinion, what's happening to the staff there is they're running a sprint at a marathon distance. They're never ever getting a break. So the idea of Agile is we take projects and we break them into small projects, and then we cool off for a little bit, and then we ramp back up, and then we cool off, and then we ramp back up. Right? This is a good analogy to think about. There's no way to work your staff or yourselves constantly at a sprint pace for a marathon distance. It does not work. You have to back off. So, we identify a release plan. That's the next piece. The release plan is actually not based on what you think it's based on. It's not about when we're going to roll out different functionalities necessarily. You talk to your customers and you find out what milestones they need. What are going to be our milestones? We're going to identify those. We're going to estimate how long it takes to get to that based on current resource levels. Right? So if they decide that they need, and actually I heard this, we really want to move to one solution. Right? Finance wants one solution put in place as fast as possible. Some of them do. So as we're having this conversation, I keep going, okay, the problem is you only have X number of resources and they're rolling it out for, what's the first group that's getting one solution? Community services? Community services. They're going to get it first because their need is the greatest right now, and it's a great place to test. You don't usually want to test with finance. It's usually a bad experience, right? And so they're going to roll it out over here. Well, you've already got people that are fully committed right now without that project being on their plate. So now I'm going to add this new project, and in order for finance to get what they want, which is roll it out as soon as possible, what do I have to do? Either increase my staff, or give something up, or negotiate with the customer based on the resources, how long it's going to take to get there. The other piece that happens here, I told you this is sort of like a spiral development model. You have user stories. What is a user story? Yeah, it's one way of doing something. It's where I always think of it as the customer selling for me. It's where the customer comes in, and let's say there's some resistance to your project. Does that ever happen? A little resistance. The reason it happens is because I just said the word your project. It's not your project. It's their project that you're enabling, right? So let's say there's a little bit of resistance. How do you overcome that resistance? Police officers are my favorite people to work with right now. The fastest way to overcome resistance with police officers is what? That would work. I haven't tried that. It's to find a young cop that's not anywhere within the chain of command and get him or her to have the technology first, because then it makes everybody that's part of that chain of command mad, and they want it. Oh, it works brilliantly, actually. It works really well. So one of the challenges is you've got to get those young guys to get the technology first, young girls, and then you talk about the experience. Or you get your champions, the people who have a lot of buy-in and political capital, and you have them build in their stories. Because you need those user stories in place. You prioritize the stories, because that's going to tell you how you're going to get folks connected. So a story that I would tell is, what can I do by having ubiquitous Wi-Fi, a mesh Wi-Fi system, if I'm a police officer? How does that change the nature of my work? How would it change the nature of my work? If I have Wi-Fi everywhere and I can do everything I need from my car.
Increase your presence on the street.
Increase your presence on the street. Okay, so who cares about the customer story of cheeks in the seat? As I like to call it. Cheeks in the seat. Who cares about that story? Manager and council. And ultimately, citizens. Right? Because more police presence on the street means safer city. Theoretically. We're going to go with that argument for now. Right? So that's one customer story that you would sell. What is another story that you could sell? Think about from the finance side. Officers are staying in the field doing their work. Less fuel costs, less wear and tear on the cars. That's a separate customer story. So you're going to use those customer stories to sell to the various groups to get buy-in, right? So you're rolling these stories out, and you're going to link it back to the business needs that relate to your strategic plan, theoretically. So now let's talk about the fun part, which is the network teams. You have to build the team, and the team has got to have collective ownership. So collective ownership comes around from a guiding vision that they have set up that is what the purpose of this project is. That, to me, is the cereal box, or the hook. If you like music, there's always a hook in music, right? It's the hook. It's the thing that resonates with every single person that would ever use that system. So it's, for me, I read Cheerios, and I buy Cheerios. Why? I'm a mom of a 3-year-old. Why would I buy Cheerios? Because it's healthy, because there's like 35% of your RDA of whatever random thing is in there, right? So I buy Cheerios. And I was actually thinking about this the other day with the cereal box kind of concept. And it's a brilliant idea. I have a protein bar that's sitting on my desk. And the front of it says, you know, like high protein, low level of sugar, super healthy, whole food, or whatever random thing it says on there. And it's pretty, it's designed nicely. And I decide that I'm going to eat this protein bar. And I never look at the back of it. So then, a little bit later on, I flip it over after I've already consumed it. I flip it over and I look at it. And there's a Hershey bar on my desk. And I flip that over and look at it. And the nutritional value in those two products is almost identical. The amount of sugar in those two products is almost identical. The butter and all the yuck stuff in there is almost identical. But because it said healthy, I chose the protein bar over the Hershey bar, right? Because in my mind, I was making the right choice. So I'm not saying you're going to game the system very much, but you are going to give them the reason on the front of the cereal box or the front of the packaging that you do to want to have this project. You've got to have small teams. 7 plus or minus 2 people. So 5, 7, 9. Why do you need an odd number? Break the tie. Absolutely, right? And you assume 5 is actually pretty low because you should always assume somebody's going to be out. So probably 7 to 9 is the best fit. Anything over 9, that's a disaster. That's a decision by committee, and you're never going to get anywhere at all. And so you have collective ownership, and collective ownership is something that we're really struggling with right now in the public sector at large, but certainly in the IT space. I think every organization that I've been in the last 2.5, 3 years, maybe it's a function of the economy, I don't know, is struggling with collective ownership. They are not owning their projects or their efforts as a team. They're blaming the units within the team, right? Well, development didn't do this, or maintenance didn't do this, whatever it is, there's all this cross-blame that's happening. So you have to have collective ownership because you're going to move the leader around constantly. It depends on the phase that you're in and who's got the strings. You're also going to have paired programming, and this actually comes straight from the Agile programming space. Paired programming means that if I got hit by a bus, this is what the bus factor is. If I got hit by a bus, things don't stop. So paired programming is just where you take 2 people and you put them on every single effort so that you're never at that single point of failure. Do you guys do this at all? Good. You might be doing Agile and you didn't even know it, right? This is going to be good. And you reorganize the team every time there's a new level of functionality coming in. Why would you do that? Because the person who writes the underlying code might not have as much skill at the GUI, right? They might not think about the way that the customer needs to interact with it. They might be thinking only about the way that it actually makes logical sense. And I love IT people, they're wonderful, but y'all are way too logical. It's a detriment. And I'm serious, it's a detriment because you assume that to get from point A to point D, you need to go through B and C. No other customer group works that way. You do realize that, right? They go around B and C, or they swim under B and C. So you're going to reorganize the team to deal with the different functionalities, and you're also going to make sure you have a variety of different folks on your team. Simple rules. How do you lay out simple rules? Number 1, you are going to clearly define what is being delivered and how you're going to deliver it. Small releases. We know empirically that big bang approaches fail. You guys learned this in Programming 101, Computer Science 101. Big bang always fails. Why does it fail?
No reaction.
change. Yes, people cannot handle this whole process of change. Here's the kicker that nobody ever talks about with Agile project management. The reason we do small releases with acceptance testing constantly is actually to create a biochemical response in the brain. What's the biochemical response? Does anybody know this? You get extra credit. Huh? Fight or flight response, absolutely. So there's the two parts of your nervous system. There's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And when you get really stressed out, your brain actually shuts down your prefrontal cortex, which is where all rational decision making happens. And it goes to your lizard brain, if you will, in the back, that gets you into fight or flight response. So the way that I always describe this is if you've ever had a fight with your spouse, and you know you're crazy, but you can't stop the fight because you're already down that path, and in your mind you're going, I'm crazy right now. I don't know how to stop this. But you're going to keep fighting because you're going to fight. It's fight or flight. You're going to win or somebody's going to die. Right? So the way that we work with this is we're doing this constant iterations, constant rollouts to give them lots of little tiny changes. So it's like spoon feeding changes to them so that they can accept the change at the end. I sort of relate everything back to my 3-year-old, and so I was dealing with my 3-year-old, and I think about how you do anything with a child, right? How you switch them from formula to real milk, right? You ask the doctor how to do this, and they say, well, add a little bit of milk every time, or add a little bit of solid food every time to whatever it is. Same thing with potty training. You don't big bang approach a potty training. It's a very bad experience if you try it, right? Those of you who have children clearly understand this. So you do everything in incremental steps because they have to get comfortable with the concept. Same concept here. You're really not doing this for your purposes. You're doing this for your customer so that their brain won't go into fight or flight. Because if you do big bang approach to them, they automatically are going to resist it. It is human nature. They cannot help it. Right? So we're going to change the chemistry of their brain by doing this. We're also going to be engaged with them and talk to them about what they like and don't like. And then we're going to be responsive to those things. And by being responsive, do I mean you have to do what they ask you to do? No. I had somebody that was in a class last year that I really liked the way he put this. He calls it finding a way to yes. And he says, but my yes is not yes, the customer's always right. My yes is I'm going to educate you and you're going to educate me and we're going to get to a middle ground. And I think that's a very reasonable thing. Talking to the task force, I hope the thing that made sense to them was, it's great to come up with all these ideas. And you're working in this space over here about citizen engagement, and I think that's wonderful. But recognize that if you force the IT department to do these things, and 911 servers go down because they did not maintain them, what do you think is a bigger deal? The fact that you have a Facebook page, or the fact that 911 is down? Right? So there's trade-offs that have to be made all the time. So we're engaging and we're educating them. We will use training and mentoring as we go through this. And then you're going to have this process that you constantly are feeding back. And actually, I think this is a really important concept right now. Simplicity. We are making things way too complex. Entirely too complex. Actually, I had an email that came in last night from a newspaper reporter in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Anybody read about the Tulsa, Oklahoma website issue? They thought their website had been hacked. It was not actually hacked. I don't know. It was in some magazine. I read it. And the newspaper reporter sends me an email and says, I realize you're at a conference and you said you're going to be out of the office and not responding to email, but can you please call me? No. Right? The answer is, I said I wasn't going to be responding, so I'm not responding. Mostly so I don't have to respond to things like that. Maybe I should always leave that message off. The question they ask is, how can governments manage these vast, complex IT systems? And how are they finding appropriate talent to do this? I thought, same way anybody else is finding appropriate talent to do this. But then the question about the vast, complex systems, I think it's a really reasonable thing to ask. Why are we making things so vast and complex? Does IT have to be that way? I don't think it does. I think we have set up a situation where we don't design simple anymore. It's pretty simple. The ratios are pretty simple. If you want X to happen, you have to do Y and Z, right? Instead of doing that, we build all of these pieces in to try to meet some parameters that aren't actually really there. So we have to have simplicity in our design. Todd.
I mean, isn't that just a reflection of how government works, where there's all these rules and exceptions and...
I think it is at some level a reflection of how government works, but I think every organization actually works that way. My husband works at IBM, and they are the most bureaucratic organization I have ever seen in my life. And by the way, he works not in IT because he doesn't know anything about IT, but he comes home and he tells me about the systems. He is using a DOS-based program at IBM.
Probably happy.
No, he's not happy. Because he has to open like 8 screens to do his work, and it really drives him crazy. But it's a really interesting concept because they make it very, very complex to do his job. And then he says to me, he says, you know, the other day I get asked to do this project. And it seems like a good idea. I'm going to be doing sort of this audit of whatever. He says, and I get a report that lists every project that I'm supposed to look at and tells me what the problems are, but there's no way to search for the projects in the system. Because he didn't give me the project number. So he sends an email over to the analyst or whoever and says, hey, I need all the, he restructures loans for Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. IBM owns a company that does that. So he says, I need all the list of the loans that go with these projects, the loan numbers. They sent him 98 pages of loan numbers that were not connected to titles at all. It was literally, he said there were 4 columns with numbers all the way down. He said, so it would have taken him, and by the way, his boss wanted this done by noon today. And he got it yesterday, 98 pages. So he calls him and says, what in the world? This is not simplistic. You know, we're making up the rules as we're building the bus as we're driving it, is the way that he sort of describes it. And I think that's exactly right. And the big issue that he has is that there's a complete lack of communication between what the boss is asking for, what the department actually understands is feasible, and what the IT analysts are actually producing, right? Because they hear one thing, the customer needs something else, and the boss has a completely different expectation. So I don't know that it's just government. I think it's human nature at some level, or just bureaucratic organizations at large. Jonathan Feldman and I were talking yesterday at the dinner event, and he said, you know, I really am a little worried about why we don't take risks in government. And this is a really salient point, because one of the concepts is you have to be courageous. How many of you feel like you can be courageous in your job? Okay, you have a good boss if you can be courageous in your job. I mean, honestly. Thank you, Abe. Abe raised his hand because his boss is sitting next to him. So you have to have courage. The reason you have to have courage and you feel like you can be courageous in your job is because if you fail, you're not going to get fired. Right? That's a good boss that puts you in that place. So Jonathan tells me that he does this open day today downtown, and he gets a letter from a citizen yesterday complaining because he had a public meeting and charged $20 for people to attend. He provided lunch, he provided snacks, he did all this sort of stuff. And then the person goes on to tell him that, you know, they are the most innovative person in this community, and how dare he not invite them to present on a panel. Anybody ever had that experience? Yes. So we have to have courage, and so he had enough courage to write back and say, I appreciate your interest. Here's the 5 different reasons that we did it this way. We would love to have you next year in a nice way, but really you can kiss it. I think that's ultimately what he was kind of saying. And you have to have courage in your environment to do that. You have to be willing to fail. How many of you believe that you can succeed without ever failing? I always ask this question. I always say, how many of you have ever had a failure? And nobody ever wants to raise their hand. I fail every hour of every day, constantly. It's the only way to actually grow and learn and do anything better is to fail all the time. Practice number 4, open information. We have to stop hoarding information about technology-enabled projects. I know you think you are magic workers, wizards, right? Everybody else thinks that they can go to Best Buy and buy whatever you're selling. So you're no longer magicians. They believe you're heretics right now, I think. I think that's the ultimate perspective that they have. So how do we do this? Number 1, we hold daily stand-up meetings. Does anybody here do a daily stand-up meeting? You do? Oh, that's great. And what do you do in the stand-up meeting?
Pretty much just given a quick update over
Quick
what the
updates,
project.
exactly right. You stand up, and so again, I've been working with law enforcement a lot lately. They have a daily stand-up meeting at every shift change. what happened on the shift, what's going to happen on the shift, is there any protocols, any things that we need to deal with. There's a prisoner sitting in somebody's car, right? He's got to get transported to the jail. We left him out there. He's handcuffed, we hope, or whatever. But they do this all the time. They have these daily stand-up meetings. It's 5 minutes of your day. What's going right? What's going wrong? What can we work on together, right? So you have to do the daily stand-up meetings. And it should be the whole team that does the daily stand-up meeting. 5 minutes, and we call it a stand-up meeting for a reason. Because you stand up the whole time. Has anybody ever been to a meeting where you stand the whole time? How long does the meeting last? 15 minutes is the most anybody will stand. Unless you're teaching a class and you have to stand the whole time. But so you do a daily stand-up meeting, you got the whole team involved. Co-location of caves and commons. So IT people are kind of like caves in my world, right? We do something that's in the black box that nobody really understands. The people that are in the commons in the open area is who? Who's out there that's getting viewed? Right? Your customers, ultimately. So what you do, they call it co-location of caves and commons. I call it the business analyst model, where you locate IT people within different departments. Not always, but while they're working on a project team. Do you want your end users coming to you and sitting in the IT department? No, because then they would learn what you do. Or don't do, right? So what you really want to do is you take the IT people that are working on this project and you put them with the customer. Has anybody ever done this? Why would it be a good idea? What's the outcome of it? You see what their processes are, because if you ask them their process, they're not going to tell you the truth. And it's not because they are intentionally lying. They're going to tell you what they were told was the process, not how they actually do the work. The other reason is it builds relationships.
When people see you, they begin to trust you.
Absolutely.
That works very well with law enforcement because it's a team approach. It's always us against them.
Yes, absolutely. You go, how many of you in here have ridden in a police car? Okay. How many of you have ridden in the front of a police car? I want to know about the back of a police car. All of us should have ridden in a police car. If we support public safety, we should be riding in police cars. We should be out at the fair, walking around, seeing how the vendors are interacting with the wireless network we've put up. Right? We should see how the flea market is using the wireless. If all of a sudden, and I think about this with this hotel, if all of a sudden I know that every customer I have has got a minimum of 2 devices on their person at all times that's hitting my wireless network, that's going to change the way I design. Right? So we have to do that. We have to have that co-location. We have to have that on-site customer experience.
Right now, I have somebody working in a division, working on a project with that.
Yeah.
I think the thing we run into, though, he's located there, but the business can also deter him from doing what he knows he needs to be doing, because they constantly come in there wanting that bell and whistle and wanting him to stop fixing what's prioritized by the director as what his priorities are, to go and, I'd like to move this arrow from here to here.
Yes. So in that case, that's where that concept of whole team is, because if they're putting delays on you, then that has to be documented, and they have to be held accountable for it, for those things. And it takes a strong leader to do that in some ways. The other thing is, I honestly believe, and maybe I'm just an optimist, although I get more cynical every year, but most people would not ask you to do something like that if they understood what it took or the implications of the changes that you're asking for, because I think that they think it's easy.
That's what we hear. Actually, every Friday we have a meeting, and they say, "Oh, but we just did this one thing. It should be easy."
Because they
in
can buy
their
your
eyes, it is easy to move this from here to there. How hard could that be?
Right. And then you show them the 55 pages of programming that it would take. I think that's the concept of the information radiator. So in my mind, information radiators remind me of being in 4th grade. And I don't know about you, but when I was in 4th grade, it was a very big deal to be asked to redesign the bulletin board in your classroom. Do y'all remember that? Like, that corrugated, paper that you would staple on there that made the border all the way around. Okay, somebody in here is shaking their head. Good, I'm thinking I'm crazy for a second. So it was a big deal. But that bulletin board was where everything happened. We have nothing like that anymore. Maybe you have an intranet, but how well is it actually used? How much information are you putting out there? Right, so we have to do this. I think dashboards are the way to go. I think we need dashboards for every project we're working on. And I think we need to be measuring and showing them. I was sitting and talking to the folks in our Environmental Finance Center. We were looking at this like water pricing, basically. And they have the coolest dashboards. ZOT's got great dashboards. And they look like a gas gauge that show red, yellow, and green. It is not very hard to understand, yet red, yellow, and like any idiot can get red, yellow, and green. Bad, good, right? And so we have these dashboards. One of the things that I would do is I would actually calculate the cost of that program change. Here's how much it would cost. Here's how many man-hours it takes, man-woman hours it takes. Here's how much that person gets paid. Here's how much it costs. Here's what's not going to happen if I do that. And that's kind of the conversation with the task force. Here's what's not going to happen if you focus all IT efforts on citizen engagement. They're not supporting 911 anymore. There's only so much time and energy that can be spent. And I think people would make informed decisions if that was the case. I don't think we give them information. Absolutely. It's all about communication. And this is just yet another vehicle. I was just going to say, similar to what you said before, you just sort of said it. When folks want to make changes and they want to change their scope, one of the things that you can do is says, yes, we can do that. And what we would be giving up is da-da-da-da-da. What are the priorities? Right. And ask them their priorities, which you've already set before because you've done that conversation. Right? If your priority, if your customer's priority is, I don't care how much it costs, I don't care how long it takes, I want it to do exactly what I want it to do when I want it to do it. Fine. Here's 5 programmers, they serve at your pleasure, they'll build anything you want, give me $1 million. Every company out there will do that for you for the right amount of money. Right? I mean, that's good common sense. So you have to start costing those things out. Light touch. This is really for the managers. We have to reduce command and control. We have to assume that the people who work with us and work for us are smart. By the way, they're probably smarter than you are. Right? Because you're the smartest people in the room, and you hire people who are smarter than you are. And I think we tend to forget that when we let them come onto our teams. So we hire really smart people. Now, if you didn't hire them, somebody else hired them, then that's a separate discussion. But if you hire them, I'm assuming that they're smarter than you are because you hired them for a reason. So we use what we call intelligent control, which is the idea that we're going to manage the overarching context of the project, not the day-to-day content of the project, not the micromanagement. We're there to support. We encourage them to do collective problem solving. Come up with an idea, come up with a solution for whatever the project is. We maintain a sustainable pace. So there's lots of ways to maintain a sustainable pace. Some people like to work at night, some people like to work in the morning, so that might be one way, is you look at sustainable pace in terms of how you allocate time. Or you might say, we're going to work on this, and then we're going to take a break. We're going to work on this, and then we're going to take a break. The other thing is you're going to encourage them to be courageous, to ask questions, to push back. You're going to give them the ability to do that and not fail nor get punished. Then we're going to use adaptive leadership. So adaptive leadership means that as we're rolling through this and we're rolling out these different iterations that we have, we're watching what happens and where the pain points are coming for our customers or our stakeholders. And as we're working through this, we are going to learn from it. That seems like a foreign concept. How many projects have you done?
Gangnam Dance.
I don't know the dance.
I don't know. She's doing Gangnam Dance.
Yes, I know she's doing the Gangnam Dance over there. Apparently you should all go YouTube it because apparently we're going to do it tonight. Sorry, that was completely chaotic, chaotic, whatever environment. So we're going to learn, and I'm thinking right now, the learning lesson here is don't let me ever be next door to the person that has the speaker system. Right? So we're going to manage these risks, we're going to reflect on it, and then we're going to write scenarios. Why do we write scenarios or do scenario planning? project obituary exercise. I actually think this is one of the best scenario planning exercises you can do. It's where you start a project, you get everybody in the room that's part of the team, and you have them write the obituary for that project dying. So I'm not saying you're assuming failure. I know this is horrible. I'm not saying you're assuming failure, but what you're going to do is you're going to identify all the risks that nobody's willing to talk about. Because they're going to write an obituary, like really it's an obituary. Nobody minds writing an obituary about projects. That's okay. But they're going to write all the things that killed the project, and then you're going to scenario plan around those various issues. Wow. Woo! I wonder if they can hear us. No. So we're going to track this, and for every story that we come up with, we've basically saved a day of redesign. Because we've already done the work. We've already done the risk analysis, right? And so this idea that yesterday's weather dictates how long it's going to take to do something. If it snowed yesterday, we know it took 5 hours to get the roads cleared. Do we learn from that? In Raleigh, apparently we don't. Because it's always the same freak out that we have. But the bottom line is you're going to look at what happened yesterday to determine how long it's going to take the next time this comes around. What is the ideal? That every time it's shorter, right? You do it faster. That's the ideal. And you map these stories back so that you can actually make your release plans work a little bit better. Then you're going to track your risks. And we do a lot of risk assessment and risk management. But do we always have to mitigate every risk? No. You can't. There's no way. If you did that, you would never leave your house. You would never touch anything. You would live in a bubble, probably. Right? So we have to figure out what risks we actually want to deal with. And we use this methodology. I put numbers in here. So the impact of the risk on a scale of 1 to 10, the probability of the risk happening on a scale of 1 to 10, and it gives me a score 1 to 100. Anthony.
If the risk is identified, management expects you to mitigate.
Oh,
If something does happen because of that particular risk, you don't want to get blamed for that. Oh, well, you should have taken care of it. You know about it.
well, yeah, I mean, I think that is part of the management challenge, but actually good managers don't do that. Good managers say, if you fail, it's okay. Failure is part of the process. You learn something from it. Then the next time, maybe the risk won't be the same. But I think about risk mitigation, and the way that I try to deal with it is, it's okay to identify, there's some risks that you cannot manage. Do y'all agree with that? Yes. I can spend my entire life trying to prevent having cancer, and I can still get cancer. I can do everything right. I can't manage that risk. I just minimize the chances by not eating bacon, apparently. But I'm very upset about the bacon and giving up. So you would figure out which ones you're going to deal with, and then you come up with a mitigation plan. To me, you create a score. If the score is over a certain level, then you build a mitigation plan around it, and you decide as a team what that score actually is. And then you're going to do this process reflection on a regular basis. What's working, what's not working. Every time you do an iteration, and then sort of macro level, every couple of iterations, you figure out if it's good or bad. If it's good, does it need to be changed? Software procurement might need to be changed. Software design might need to be changed. The programming language we're using might need to be changed. We do the scenario planning to try to prepare the team for various outcomes. What group does this unbelievably well? Public safety, and in my world, military. The military actually is where a lot of this came from in terms of the Agile, because the idea with the military is that in a battle, if your commanding officer gets killed, gets captured, whatever, what happens? Next person up steps up to the plate. What if the entire management team gets wiped out? Doesn't matter, because you know your mission, and you go after your mission, and you do whatever it is that you've been trained to do, and you keep going forward, right? And so that's the idea. The military actually does this really well. They prepare their people for any possible outcome. It takes a ridiculous amount of time to do, but by and large, it's very successful, right? I mean, I guess we could debate that, but we're not going to right now. But by and large, it's a very successful concept. So we're not trying to predict the outcome. We're trying to prepare our team to deal with the chaos that they will inevitably face. I mean, right at the end, but I want to have a chance for you guys to ask any questions around Agile project management that you might have. Oh God, I didn't actually expect questions.
Very broad comment question that, one, I agree with everything you're saying, and I've been with organizations that you can make that work, and I've been with organizations that fight you tooth and nail every step of the way for a variety of reasons.
Yep.
How do you surmount that?
I think it takes, I mean, if you don't have leadership buy-in, you're not going to be able to do this. Now, the cool thing about Agile is you can do it with small teams and not tell anybody you're doing it.
Exactly.
And if it works, you document the heck out of the success, and then you grassroots it up. Very few managers will turn down an idea that's already worked and has been proven successful, because ultimately it makes them look good. And it also depends on, I think they're still recording, and I'm going to be uncomfortable with this, but so edit this out. Can you turn that off for a second?
That won't be suspicious at all.
All right.